Hello, soulmates, and welcome to another Commander Abridged. Today's a fun one with some guest appearances in the banter from some of the homies watching via Discord. Let's get right into the deck overviews. First up is CJ playing the partner pairing of Kraum, Ludevic's Opus and Ardenn, Intrepid Archaeologist. CJ's goal is to use Ardenn to hand out equipments to his opponent's creatures, then incentivize those opponents to swing at his other opponents. By the late game, he will hopefully have a way to flip those beefy attackers back onto their controllers. Next is Chris playing Millicent, Restless, Revenant. This is Azorius Go Wide, with small evasive early game threats giving way to massive board states thanks to Millicent's triggered ability. Third up is James playing Hans Eriksson. James wants to get Hans out, give him a big ass, manipulate the top of his library, and benefit from Hans's trigger, pulling big fatties out for free. Finally, there's Joey playing Gahiji Honored One, a deck looking to control combat, goad opponents' creatures, and pump them up. Once the dust settles, the plan is to swing in for the kill himself. It's game time. CJ starts the game off with a tapped Steam Vents, opting to not pay the 2 life and passes the turn. Chris plays an island, passing as well. James plays a Godzilla Forest, then taps it right away for a Soul Ring, and he passes. And Joey plays a Command Tower and passes. For turn 2, CJ plays a Plains, then casts a Lightning Greaves, passing right afterwards. Another island comes down on Chris's board as his land for turn 2, and he casts Favorable Winds, giving all of his flyers a +1/+1 buff. He passes the turn. James starts with an untapped Rootbound Crag as his land for the turn, then he casts Hans Eriksson from the command zone. With no other plays for now, he passes. Joey plays a Forest, then casts Sakura Tribe Elder. Keeping it up as a blocker, he passes the turn to CJ to start turn 3. CJ untaps and draws a Haunted card.
Draw. I am the Draw Ghost.
Well, that
CJ does sound spooky most of the time.
He plays a Plains and casts a Bloodthirsty Blade, attaching it right away to James's Hans Eriksson, giving it a buff of +2/+0 and goading it, much to James's dismay.
Hans.
Oh boy.
No.
Goated.
Gonna attack anyway, but alright.
Worked up white boy.
But I'm going to attack me.
You're right, I'll attack Joey, he'll block with Sakura Tribe Elder, and then he'll sack it to get a land, and we'll all benefit. What?
CJ passes, but Chris does not get the memo.
Chris.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Sorry.
When Chris starts his turn, he drops in a Plains, then casts Soul Herder, setting up for Flickering nonsense to go along with Joey's Flicking nonsense. He nasty with that shit. Chris passes. James starts with a Mountain, then casts a Sword of Hearth and Home, which he equips onto Hans immediately, giving a +2/+2 buff and protection from white and green. In response, since it can't block Hans anymore, Joey sacrifices his Sakura Tribe Elder to get a Mountain from his library onto the battlefield tapped.
Alright, now he's got the blade on. Now he's got 2 blades, dude. Hans is dual wielding.
Damn.
I'm stoked.
Where's he holding that rose now?
It's somewhere.
James enters combat and swings Hans at Joey, and Hans triggers on attack. James reveals a Blasphemous Act from the top of his library, which goes to his hand. Joey has no blockers and takes 5 commander damage. This triggers the Sword of Hearth and Home, and James finds a basic forest for his battlefield and does not flicker anything with the sword's other clause of the trigger. He passes the turn. Joey starts off the turn with a Forest, then casts an Avacyn's Pilgrim. He then tries to Vow of Duty Hans Eriksson, but forgets that it has protection from white.
It has protection from
Oh,
white.
white, dude. You can't.
Pro white.
What?
Yeah.
Hey.
Why do you have pro white? What do you have?
The Sword of Hearth and Home. It's the Selesnya sword, dude.
Corny.
They're almost done with them.
Corny as fuck.
I assume that's why you sacrificed Steve.
What?
Because I played the Hearth and Home, and you were like, I can't block anyway.
Man.
What did you call him?
Steve, that's what he's known as.
He's known as Steve. What a prestigious name reduced to Steve.
He instead puts the Vow of Duty onto Chris's Soul Herder, giving it a +2/+2 pump and vigilance, and preventing it from attacking Joey. He passes over to CJ. Training Center is played as CJ's land for turn 4, and he casts an Assault Suit. James has a deck building question for CJ.
Okay,
CJ, is there a win con? I mean, I don't remember.
the win con is
Only die.
yeah. The opponent's doing enough damage,
And then you take back all the equipment. I get it. Okay, yeah.
Well, not necessarily. Most of the time, I can just literally everyone else is attacking each other so much that I don't need to. But if people don't beat, then the Kraum comes out and starts to.
Failure to comply.
CJ passes to Chris. Chris plays an island, then casts a mirror entity. He enters combat and swings the Soul Herder at James, who has no blocks and takes 3 damage. He passes, and on his end step, Soul Herder triggers, so he exiles and returns the mirror entity to the battlefield, putting a +1/+1 counter on the Soul Herder as a result, and after this he passes the turn to James. James untaps and heads right into combat. He swings Hans at Chris, and Hans triggers on attack. James reveals a Kessig Wolf Run from the top of his library and puts that into his hand. Chris can't block since Hans has protection from white, so he takes 5 commander damage. This again triggers the Sword of Hearth and Home, so James grabs a mountain from his library and puts it onto the battlefield tapped, again not flickering a creature with the other half of the trigger. He goes into his second main phase and plays the Kessig Wolf Run as his land for the turn, and he casts an Inferno Titan, which triggers upon entering the battlefield.
We're doing 3.
You. Straight up.
Okay.
He passes the turn. James plays a forest, then slams down Gahiji Honored One from the command zone. With no other plays for now, he passes the turn. Turn 5 begins with a Plains on CJ's board for his land for the turn. He follows this up casting a Flumph and casts Ardenn, Intrepid Archaeologist from the command zone right afterwards. He enters combat and Ardenn triggers, so CJ puts the Assault Suit onto James's Inferno Titan. He then passes the turn to Chris. Chris untaps, and in his upkeep, Assault Suit triggers, so CJ asks nicely if Chris wants the Titan.
Do you want an Inferno Titan?
Do I want a Titan?
Inferno.
An Inferno Titan.
I'd love one.
Alright, cool. It's yours. Just swing one creature at me so I can draw a card and you can draw a card.
Flump.
The Inferno Titan happily goes over to Chris's board in exchange for Chris hitting the Flump for them both to draw a card each. He heads right into combat, swinging the Mirror Entity at CJ and the Inferno Titan at Joey. On attack, the Titan triggers, and James tries to get Chris to kill the Flump.
You don't have a Titan trigger. Why are you putting the 3 damage?
She doesn't want the pumpkins.
Why would you not want to swing?
Yo, damage Flump and fucking kill it. You guys should
Don't
draw
kill
a card
the
again.
Flump.
But you'll draw another card. You draw another card out of it.
I'll be real sad.
Brilliant.
We then dive into the Flump specifics.
So keep the Flump around. Everyone's gonna draw a card.
Flump.
It's gonna be nice.
Kill the
And Plump's
Flump.
not gonna die if I hit him, right? Because it would only
Technically, if you
oh,
deal
it
with
would, right?
and then the mirror should
Yeah,
kill,
because-
keeping all 3.
CJ's trying to make tactics. Never make deals with the devil. That's rule number 1. I'm telling you right now.
Trust nobody.
I don't know. He gave me a free card.
Doggy dog is
Well,
fun.
he doesn't.
Doggy dog.
Here's the thing: is he says he's gonna give you the card, but the card says target opponent, so he doesn't have to let you draw that card.
You could easily be like, "Thanks, Chris. Here you go, James."
Chris deals 1 damage to Flump, 1 to Avison's Pilgrim, and 1 to James's Dome. The damage to the Flump triggers the Flump, giving a draw to both Chris and CJ, and the Pilgrim dies. On Declare Blockers, CJ blocks the Mirror Entity with Flump, so CJ draws a second card from this, but Chris unfortunately misses the second draw, as he was the target for CJ's trigger. Joey takes a healthy 8 damage to the face from the Titan. In his second main phase, Chris plays a Celestial Colonnade, then goes to end his turn, putting Soul Herder's trigger onto the stack at his end step. He flickers the Mirror Entity, putting another +1/+1 counter onto Soul Herder, and the turn goes over to James. James starts with a Forest, then heads right into combat. He swings both Hans and the Inferno Titan at Chris, and both trigger on attack. James chooses to resolve the Hans trigger first, revealing a Mwanvuli Beast Tracker, which enters the battlefield and fights Hans while its ETB trigger goes on the stack. The tracker dies while Hans takes no damage due to his protection from green, and then James searches his library for Vigor, putting it on top of his library when the Moanvuli Beast Tracker enters the battlefield. Trigger resolves. The Inferno Titan trigger then resolves, and James deals 1 damage to Flumph, 1 to Mirror Entity, and 1 to CJ's face. This triggers the Flumph, and CJ targets James with it, giving them both a card draw, and putting the Vigor into James's hand. With the attack triggers now resolved, Chris casts a Disorder in the Court, targeting the Inferno Titan. The Titan gets exiled and will come back at the end step without Assault Suit attached to it, and Chris investigates 1 time, creating a clue token. This also triggers the Soul Herder, giving it another +1/+1 counter. Chris then takes 7 commander damage from Hans, triggering the Sword of Hearth and Home once again. James finds a basic forest for the battlefield, which enters tapped, and in his second main phase, James casts a Thunderfoot Baloth, following it up with a Huatuo Honored Physician.
Legendary creature human 1/2 tap. Put target creature card from your library on top. Put target creature card from your graveyard on top of your library. Activate this only during your turn before attackers are declared.
Whoa, dude, it's almost like he synergizes.
It's almost like it.
That's correct.
James then ends his turn, and Inferno Titan re-enters the battlefield tapped, triggering it for another 3 damage. He chooses to deal 2 damage to CJ's face and 1 to the Flumph, giving him and CJ another draw. The turn then goes to Joey. Joey starts his turn off by casting a Frenzied Saddle Brute, giving all creatures the ability to attack with haste as long as they are attacking one of Joey's opponents. CJ tries to warn him about an incoming board wipe, but he does not listen.
27.
Try and not develop your board. Try and do other things.
Oh.
He just said try not to develop.
Yeah, I'm attacking Chris for 13. So I don't really care what CJ just said.
I think that's fair, if I'm being honest.
Chris doesn't block and takes a Gahiji boosted 13 damage, 6 of it being commander damage. Joey passes the turn. CJ plays a Clifftop Retreat as his land for turn 6, then casts Slash the Ranks. It resolves, and all creatures except Gahiji, Ardenn, and Hans die. He heads to combat, and Ardenn triggers, attaching his Assault Suit onto Gahiji. Ardenn then attacks Joey for 2 commander damage, and in his second main phase, CJ equips Ardenn with the Lightning Greaves. He then passes. Chris untaps, and on his upkeep, the Assault Suit triggers. CJ asks Chris if he wants the Gahiji, and he politely accepts. We don't represent this on Chris's board, sorry about that, but trust me, he's got a Gahiji. Chris casts a Marble Diamond, which comes in tapped, and follows that up with a The Modern Age. The Saga gets a lore counter after it enters, and Chris draws and discards a Mischievous Catgeist. He enters combat and swings Gahiji at James, which triggers on attack to give itself +2/+0, dealing 8 commander damage to James. Chris then passes the turn with Gahiji going back on Joey's board. James starts his turn, and the Assault Suit triggers again. CJ opts to not give it to your boy James, so he simply draws and enters his first main phase. A Temple of Abandon is played as James's land for the turn, so he scries 1 card and puts it on the bottom of his library. He enters combat and swings Hans at Joey. Hans then triggers, and James reveals a Colony Ambush, which goes right into his hand. Joey has no blocks and takes 5 commander damage, triggering the Sword of Hearth and Home. James finds a basic forest from his library and opts to flicker Hans this time, putting them both back onto the battlefield as the trigger resolves. This takes the Bloodthirsty Blade and the sword off of Hans, so in his second main phase, the Sword of Hearth and Home gets re-equipped to Hans by James. He follows that up with an Ilharg the Razeboar, and after it resolves, the turn passes to Joey. He starts off with a forest, then casts a Thragtusk, and gains 5 life when it enters the battlefield. He enters combat and has a chat with the table.
CJ, do you have any blockers?
I do not, but it cannot attack me because it has Assault Suit equipped.
Yeah, it does. Oh, so I'm beefed up right now. I forgot about
It is a 6/6 and haste.
that.
What do I get out of it?
What do you want?
No attacks after
Because
this one.
here's the reality: is I either attack you or I almost kill Chris,
Yeah, that seems kind of unfun. Right
and
now.
like Chris doesn't have anything.
Yeah, but we should just keep it up and then just CJ.
Swing at James.
CJ can't take your gift.
Don't feel bad for killing me if that's what you got.
CG Gahiji.
Chris is like, listen, I'm a man of reason.
You
You gotta kill me, you kill me, bro. Alright.
don't hit him, hit James.
You have a way, you have a means. Getting rid of this goading.
Actually, I do. Fuck, I
Shit's
actually do,
goaded.
dude. I actually do. I actually
Wait,
do. I
what?
actually do.
James casts a Beast Within, targeting the assault suit and giving CJ a 3/3 Beast token. Joey then swings at CJ, who blocks with the Beast token, killing it. He passes the turn to CJ, otherwise known as.
He's a little puppet master,
James
dude.
is acting up over here.
He really
He's
is.
pulling so many strings over there.
CJ starts his turn with a Rogue's Passage and follows that up with a Humble Defector and a Blazing Sunsteel. He then pays 1 mana to attach the Bloodthirsty Blade to Hans Eriksson and casts a Darksteel Mutation, enchanting Gahiji to make it a 0/1 indestructible bug, losing all other abilities and types. He enters combat, triggering Ardenn, attaching the Blazing Sunsteel to Joey's Thragtusk in exchange for him swinging it elsewhere. He goes to attack but realizes James has blockers.
The two that he is blocking, never mind, I'm a liar. I'll pass.
Yeah, get out of here.
And he goes to pass the turn, much to my displeasure.
Read the
No
room,
greed on the humble D, man.
I can. I just played it.
You put the greaves on the humble D.
And then you put the grease
It's
back
like,
on Ardenn.
does anyone want 2 cards?
No. Ew.
Chris does untap here, but we let CJ do the thing because it's a casual game, so whatever. He equips the Lightning Greaves onto the Humble Defector and activates it to draw 2 cards, giving it to Joey as the ability resolves. The turn then officially passes to Chris. He untaps and draws, then the second lore counter gets put onto the Modern Age, having Chris draw and discard an Azorius Signet. He plays an island, then taps out to play Millicent, Restless, Revenant from the command zone for its full casting cost. With no other plays, he passes the turn. James untaps and asks a really good question.
Do I just fucking go to combat?
You said that the best like 3 turns.
And you are
Do I just
Gruul.
And he actually doesn't do that because first he casts a Faithless Looting, drawing 2 and discarding Blasphemous Act and Rada Heir to Keld. He enters combat and swings Ilharg at CJ and Hans at Chris. They both trigger, and James resolves Hans's ability first, revealing a mountain which goes into his hand. The Ilharg trigger then resolves, and James drops in a Meteor Golem attacking Joey, which triggers when it enters the battlefield. The Golem targets and destroys the Lightning Greaves that are attached to the Humble Defector. There's no blocks, thus CJ takes 6 damage, Chris takes 5 Hans damage, and Joey takes 3 damage. The Sword of Hearth and Home triggers, but James misses it until a bit later when the table allows him to resolve it. What a nice group of boys. He finds a mountain from his library and exiles the Ilharg, putting them both back onto the battlefield as the trigger resolves. He casts a Vigor, then follows it up with a Colony Ambush, targeting Ilharg to fight the Ardenn. Ardenn is killed, and no damage is dealt to Ilharg thanks to Vigor, instead putting 2 +1/+1 counters onto the pig. He plays a mountain, then passes the turn. Joey starts his turn by activating the Humble Defector, but due to a rules error and me not fucking understanding how haste works at the time, or summoning sickness, or basically anything about Magic the Gathering, Joey doesn't activate it, but we let him draw 2 cards later when I actually read a fucking book for the first time in my life. However, our error does upset Joey.
Yo, he's just
Top
the
5
judge, bro. That's all it is.
Holy shit.
Whack. That's
Number
the wackish.
5.
Number
What do you
5.
mean this doesn't have haze?
Number 5.
He casts a Vow of Wildness, giving +3/+3 and trample onto the Thragtusk, and forgetting his deal with CJ, swings it right at him for 11 damage, putting him to 16. In his second main phase, Joey plays in a Crowan Horse, putting it directly onto James's physical battlefield as it enters.
Look, I actually am next to him, so I can put it on my board.
We don't want to get him.
Oh, holy fucking shit. How'd he do that?
Wait, holy shit.
Wait,
I thought they weren't in the same room, dude. How'd they do that?
Dude, number 4.
He passes the turn. CJ plays a Prismatic Vista as his land for the turn, then casts a Divine Reckoning, having everyone at the table choose 1 creature and destroying the rest. CJ has nothing to choose, Chris chooses Millicent, James chooses Ilharg, and Joey chooses Thragtusk because his big Gahiji boy is staying alive as it's indestructible. When the Vigor gets destroyed, it is shuffled into James's library. CJ then pays 1 mana to equip the Bloodthirsty Blade onto James's Ilharg, preventing a pig swing at least one more turn. He passes. Chris untaps and draws, and another lore counter is put onto the Modern Age, this time exiling it and returning it to the battlefield as Vector Glider. Chris then casts an Empyrean Eagle, giving his flyers an additional +1/+1 buff. He enters combat and swings Millicent at James, who cannot block, and takes 6 commander damage. This triggers Millicent, creating Chris a 1/1 spirit token with flying, which is now a 3/3 thanks to his anthems. The turn goes to James. James starts by equipping the Sword of Hearth and Home onto Ilharg, then enters combat. He swings Ilharg at Chris and drops in the Meteor Golem, attacking CJ with the Ilharg attack trigger. He targets and destroys the Darksteel mutation with the Meteor Golem ETB trigger. Chris blocks Ilharg with his Vector Glider and takes 6 trample damage, while CJ has no blocks and takes 3. The Sword of Hearth and Home then triggers, so James grabs a basic land from his library and flickers the Meteor Golem this time, destroying the Bloodthirsty Blade, dethroning the Goad God. In his second main phase, James casts a Protean Hulk, followed by a Ranging Raptors. With nothing else, he passes the turn to Joey. Joey starts with a Harmonize, drawing 3 cards as the spell resolves, and then asks to read the Protean Hulk.
It just says when it dies, I search.
Holy shit, how are they doing this?
What is happening?
Can I read your Hulk?
Are they in the same room?
Check this
Oh
out.
my
Oh my god, what?
It's the metaverse, dude. Sign up.
He casts a Soul Ring, then uses it in a Plains to cast Duelist's Heritage. He enters combat and swings Gahiji at CJ and the Thragtusk at James. On attack, the Duelist's Heritage triggers, and Joey gives Thragtusk Double Strike until end of turn. Gahiji also triggers, giving both creatures an additional +2/+0 buff. In response to these triggers, CJ cracks his Prismatic Vista, paying 1 life to find a basic land, and after it's put onto the battlefield, casts a Generous Gift targeting Gahiji. It resolves, and Joey gets a 3/3 Elephant token. Before blockers are declared, Chris helps out Joey.
Wait. Joey, I screwed you over before, so I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna flash out a Nebelgast and tap that.
Oh, man.
That is
That's so upsetting.
He flashes out a Nebelgast Herald targeting Protean Hulk, tapping it down before James can declare it as a blocker. James blocks the Thragtusk with his Ranging Raptors, triggering the Enrage effect for it on the first strike damage, allowing James to go get another basic land for his battlefield. With Trample and the additional damage from Double Strike, James takes 19, going down to 3.
That makes my job significantly easier.
Joey passes the turn to CJ, who's plotting his revenge. He plays a Plains, then casts Kraum Ludevic's Opus, or as he calls it.
Well, cast Kraum, I do get to do the non-compliance hammer.
He enters combat right away and swings Kraum at James, and Kraum gets Double Strike thanks to Joey's Duelist's Heritage, killing James on first strike damage. In his second main phase, CJ casts a Wheel of Misfortune, the most confusing fucking wheel of all time, baby! Roll the clip!
We all gotta write down a number and reveal it all at the same time. Lowest numbers do not wheel. Highest number takes that damage. Anything that's not the lowest does wheel, no matter what.
Dude, that'd be... Dude, oh my god. If CJ fucking, like, pulls out a 0, I will shit myself. That would be number 1. That would be number 1. Number 1.
Number 1.
Mind games.
CJ picks 40, Chris picks 1, and Joey picks 3. CJ dies to his own spell, willingly of course, and Joey wheels, drawing 7, taking no damage, and Chris does nothing. But he does go to his turn now that CJ is dead. Chris untaps and casts a Sire of the Storm. He then enters combat and swings everything at Joey. Joey cannot block and takes 16 damage, going to 8, and this triggers Millicent 3 times, giving Chris 3 1/1 spirit tokens with flying. He passes to Joey. Joey plays a Cinderglade and then recasts Gahiji Honored One from the command zone.
It's either he has Swords to Plowshares and
Or
he
he
wins,
doesn't. Yeah.
or he doesn't.
Or
and
he
you
doesn't.
win.
Make him have it. Make him have it, Joey. Make him have it.
Let's fucking see what happens.
He enters combat and swings both the 3/3 Elephant token and the Thragtusk at Chris. On attack, Duelist's Heritage triggers, and Joey gives the double strike to his Thragtusk. Chris doesn't have a swords or a path to exile, so Chris cannot block sufficiently to survive, and therefore he dies. I loved watching this game, and it seems like all the boys got to get up to some shit, with none of the decks really getting screwed or stuck in place. So you love to see that when you and the homies are dumping several hours into this godforsaken game, since you all don't live close enough to hang out in person and do normal shit, like talk to each other. James built up archenemy cred right out of the gate and got ego checked by traffic cop CJ. Chris filled the board with his little ghosties, and Joey got to cast motherfucking Thragtusk. So it was good vibes all around. I hope you all vibed with us, and thank you for watching. If the Humble D is in your deck, and I see the Humble D come down on your board, and I see you have the opportunity to activate the Humble D, but you don't activate the Humble D, I'm gonna get upset. What, are you gonna leave it up as a block? You're gonna swing the Bing? It's a fucking 2-1, man. It's there to draw cards. You tap it, you pass it, you pass it, you pass it, it comes back. Then it's your turn again. Then when it's your turn again, you tap it, you draw 2 cards. Look at that shit. That's the way the card was designed. Don't let me see a fucking untapped Humble D, no summoning sickness, on your board. Am I understood? Let me know in the comments.